Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on another episode of Why I Love Flagler County, your local podcast spotlighting local businesses and local residents on why they like being in Flagler County. Today, I'm super excited to have Mr. Pastor Trey with us today. Thank you so much, Trey, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for having me. It is
Of,
an honor and a pleasure.
of course. Well, so I know you pretty well because you are I don't know what your official title, but you were the pastor of the young adults when you came into Parkview.
hmm
It's kind of been a while now, like at least like 7 or so months now, right?
Yeah, we moved here the first week of June.
Okay.
Um, and so whatever that adds up to,
I'm not good at
that's
math.
it. Neither am I. Neither am
That's
I. So
why
we're
I
just gonna,
joined
yeah.
podcasting, is I didn't have to do math.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, so I know a little about your story, but why don't you share a little bit on coming to Palm Coast, finding Palm Coast, and how have you liked it down
Yeah.
here?
So my dad and Pastor Greg, who's the lead pastor at Parkview, have known each other. So Pastor Greg has known me since before I was born.
Hmm.
Um, and I was a youth pastor in Jacksonville, which is where I was born and raised for 5 years. And then we moved and planted a church South Orlando area called St. Cloud a couple years ago. And in that process, we had to fundraise to plant the church. And so we came to Parkview and we just fell in love with this place. And Parkview was really good to us. And Pastor Greg was a great mentor throughout that whole process.
Hmm.
And then, long story short, we ended up handing that church over to another couple. And we just asked God, what's next? And I was still really close to Pastor Greg. And so uh, we just started talking about, God, what is God doing? Is he leading us to Palm Coast? And Pastor Greg affirmed it, God affirmed it, and I felt peace about it. And so throughout that whole process, last June, we made the decision to move here. And it's interesting. Um, Jacksonville's over 1.5 million people. Orlando's definitely over 1.5 million people. Palm Coast ain't even at 100,000 people yet. Um, and it's such a change of
Hmm.
all that and speed, pace of life, and we love it. We are so blessed to be here, and
Hmm.
we're just really thankful that God brought us here.
Yeah, I completely relate because where I used to come from in Michigan, our county was 1 million, the neighboring county was 1 million, the other county was like 800,000.
Yeah,
So this was a huge, we didn't realize, like I knew it was going to be some type of change because my dad
yeah,
originally pitched like in the middle of nowhere and I Googled it. I was like, Dad, this is a 12,000 population. I can't
yeah,
even comprehend how lonely that is.
yeah,
I'm like,
exactly.
okay, we need
Yeah.
this kind of population. But even then,
hmm
I'm like, okay, there's a change, there is a
Right.
difference. But
Yeah.
I think,
hmm
it's depending on the timing in your life and how you want to be in that
Yeah.
community. I don't know, but it's
Yeah.
really fun to learn the different sides.
Yeah.
Really quick, I would love to know. So you started out as a youth pastor in Jacksonville. So
hmm
you were born and raised in Jacksonville, but you spent 5 years as a youth pastor. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
And then you went and then you planted a church in Orlando, and
hmm
now you're here as one of the pastors, especially for the young adults ministry here in Parkview.
Yeah.
How have the different changes been? Is there anything that you learned that you didn't realize you needed to learn?
Yeah. So when I was a youth pastor, for some reason they handed me the keys to the youth group at 19 years old, and I couldn't tell you why. And I mean, it
We're
was a
still a
student
youth.
ministry. Yeah, I mean, it was a student ministry of 200 people, and yeah, just a lot. So I'll start out by saying this: I'm really thankful that people let me fail. And I'm really thankful that people took a risk and they didn't let me completely, spiral out, but they let me take chances. And some of those chances were, great wins. And some of them were great losses.
Mm.
And I'm just really thankful for leadership who took a chance on me. And I'm thankful for that. And so when I was there for 5 years, I really got to um, kind of start to hone in on some crafts and some leadership skills and some speaking skills. And then when we planted our church, I was 25, which is still crazy to think about that. Um, and along that process, um, I would say when we planted our church, it was, I mean, in full transparency, it was an extremely lonely season. And so what my wife and I, for the first time, had to learn is that without, that my whole family lived in Jacksonville. And so
Mm-hmm.
without that structure, without that support system, without that community, what does it look like to find soul comfort and fulfillment, soul dependence on the Holy Spirit and the Lord? And that was a time where we just held the hand of God as close as we ever had. And it taught us how dependable God is,
Mm-hmm.
how close and comforting the Lord is. And so that was a season where we were taught that. And uh, and then in this season, we are just seeing the Lord move in great and mighty ways in different areas. But yeah, I think all of those, honing in on a craft, depending on the Lord, and now in a season of still growing and maturing, but also in the same lane of like really starting to, you know, come into your own. Like I'll give you an example. They say it takes about 300 sermons for you to start to find your voice. And I would say in that church planting season, I found it.
Mm-hmm.
And then now I'm coming into a season where people like aren't seeing a learning curve. It's
Right.
more of just like this is Trey,
Yeah.
and it's a yeah, just we love where we are right now, and I'm really
Mm-hmm.
thankful for the lessons so far. And I know there are
Mm-hmm.
plenty of lessons to be learned still.
Yeah.
So I don't. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, I think it
Okay.
did. Yeah, no,
Okay.
I actually really love that you said that, it takes like 300 sermons to find your voice because that's how it was for me in podcasting. I started 3 years ago. The first 100 I did terrible. So bad. The first one I did, if I looked at it, I would want to wipe it from the internet.
Yeah.
Um,
Hmm.
and when I came to Flagler, I had already 300 under my belt.
Yeah.
And now being in Flagler, I'm doing these. I think this is my 50th episode for the Flagler
Hmm.
one. And people are like, you're so good at this, you're
Hmm.
so welcoming.
Yeah.
And I'm like, there's a lot of learning. Because I
Yeah.
guarantee you, if I showed you my first one, you'd be like, that is not the same person. It's
Yeah.
like she
Yeah.
was taken out by a clone. It's a whole
Yeah.
different thing, right?
Yeah.
So
It is a
I
lot of
really,
learning, and
hmm
it's a lot of you know, I don't know about you and your podcast, but I don't mean my speaking. It was a lot of mimicking of I
yeah.
mimicked certain people. And there would sometimes I would say something like, I would never say that outside of this platform. Why did I even say that here? Uh, but eventually you just find it. And so
hmm
it's okay to mimic as long as you don't stay a mimicker. You start to
Right.
learn and you find your own voice.
Yeah, like when I was starting out the podcast, I spent a lot, and I like obviously I'm really into like movies and TV shows and
Hmm.
anything. So I would end up watching a bunch of interviews, right? Like my favorite
Hmm.
one to ever watch is, the hot ones with
Hmm.
the First We Feast or whatever. I love
Sean,
that guy.
yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I love that guy. And I love his questions. And I was like, I would love to do something like that. I'm like, I am
Yeah.
doing something like that. I can just incorporate what I like about it and then my own style. And for
I'm
me, I was
glad we're not eating hot wings. Let me just say that.
man,
Okay.
I would love to do that, but also, like, I was telling my friend yesterday, I'm like, I would love to do that, but, like, I also like my stomach lining, so
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
probably good for now,
Yeah.
but that would be really fun
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
general. But yeah,
Maybe
so
one day.
yeah, and I also wanna kinda highlight that point where you said that you were depending a lot on the Lord, through, like, those times. I think we as humans, we seek to find relatability within community, and that's how we build
Mhm.
it. But I think it's also really important that we have that alone time to build up ourselves with God, putting all of that faith, like, okay, I don't know anyone else who's going through this, but I know you, God, know what I'm going through
Mhm.
and can help me through
Yeah.
that. And that's really where we can build our own strong sense of self to integrate into the community. Like, okay, this is this is who I am. When I meet people, they'll know and they'll see me for who I am and not just like you
Yeah.
mentioned, like mimicking.
Mhm.
Um, so I loved that part. Um, so you've only been in Flagler and Palm Coast technically as a resident for a few months now, but what are some of
Yeah.
the things that you like to do to get out there? I know that there are some places and events that you do, but
Yeah. Mhm.
what do you like to do to get out there, kind of get to know the community?
Yeah. So before I kind of plug in what we do,
Mhm.
I'll start with this. So we have my wife and I, we have two boys. So we're constantly trying to look for ways to get out of the house.
Right.
And with that being said, if you're new to the community with have young kids or whatever, we love Holland Park. We are there
Oh
at least
yeah.
once a week. Um, one of the nicest public parks I've ever been to. And I would recommend anybody go there. Over in Flagler Beach area, they do these things called First Fridays, in which local vendors line up and it's live music. You can buy food. It's a great and fun time to just hang out by the beach and find community that way. And then I love coffee. And so my wife and I will typically just hit up random coffee shops and then buy our boys like a blueberry muffin or something. And there's an hour of the day that's gone by, and we got out and we did some stuff. And so those are just some fun things that we love to do as a
Mhm.
family, and it gets us out in the community. And um, yeah, it's fun. And you're if you have young kids, kids can become friends by just saying hi.
Right.
And so then you're like, hey, is that your kid? You're talking to another parent, they're like, yeah, that's my kid. And you just strike up a conversation and maybe you'll find community that way. I don't know. But you're not going to find community just staying at home.
Right.
So there's a lot of stuff to do. And Holland Park, First Fridays, random coffee shops, that's what we love to do.
Yeah, definitely. If you want to go into the
Yeah.
next part too.
And then what we do for 18 to 30-year-olds at Parkview is we understand that, throughout the week for that age group, we're not a college town. Um, this isn't a major metropolis, but what we wanted to do is provide that space for community. And so, if you're 18 to 30, this is what we do on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. at Parkview is we gather together and we call it midweek. We gather together at 7 p.m. There's food. I say we eat, we meet, and then we split. And so what that means is like we come together, we provide dinner, we eat, we meet, we're building community with each other for about 30 minutes. And then from there, we are a church. And so we split up into groups. And if you're like, well, I've never been, how do I know which group to go to if I were to show up? We would help you out. It would not be weird or whatever. And we just open the Bible together and we facilitate conversations about it. This is a biblical truth. What do you think about it? What does this mean for you? What are the depths of this? How does this transform your life? And it's all focused on the person and life of Jesus. And but it is a great way to find community. I can't tell you how many people have walked in since we've been here in the past, I'm going to say 8 months, that were like, hey, I just found you guys on social media and um, I'm just looking for community. And they've stuck because they found friends.
Hmm.
And it's an awesome place for, again, that age group, 18 to 30-year-olds, to come and just find friends, find community. And that's on Thursday nights at 7 right here at our church.
Perfect. And I'll make sure I put like extra details in the description so people can check that
Yeah.
out if they want to look. I know that's a
Hmm.
great place that a lot of people, and I think it's also a really healthy place if you don't know where to start for the Bible, right?
Yeah.
You're scared, and which is totally understandable. Like you don't know what's
Yeah.
going on. You want to go, but you're like, I'm not gonna know anything. I think you should go anyway because a lot of people will have answers or they can help
Hmm.
find you answers. And
Yep.
I know that, like Rachel Dawson, she was on the
Hmm.
podcast. I know that she mentioned like I think she's a small group leader. I know
Yep.
she's an
Hmm.
amazing person at facilitating questions and
Yeah.
opening up that to like, hey, you don't know the first chapter of the Bible. We'll help you. And
Yeah.
so for those who want to delve deeper, they've known it their whole life, or people who have never even looked at a single word, there's
Hmm.
a space for you to be there in general. So
Yep.
yeah, awesome, Trey. Well, thank you so much for the time. I really appreciate it. I loved
Absolutely.
hearing more of your story. I think it's really inspiring. And sharing that, for people our age, I think that's a very common thing. As I mentioned to people, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm 20. And they're like, is there anything for you to do here? And I'm like, yeah, there's people here.
Yeah.
Trust it's
Yeah.
fine.
There are. Yeah. Hmm.
It's a
Yeah.
very common question I get from people a little bit older than me, which I think is really, really sweet of them to ask.
Yeah.
But yeah, I appreciate your time today. It was a real pleasure.
Thank you, Ms.
Yeah,
Khan.
of course. Well, I'll see you all next time. Bye.